husband passed away 14 months ago, or so I believed. He had a heart attack, that's what they told me. A massive one, sudden and final, in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons on Carling Avenue, where he used to stop every single morning before work. The paramedics said he was gone before the ambulance arrived. I identified his body myself. I stood in that cold room at the Ottawa General, and I looked at his face, and I nodded, and I said, yes, that's him. That's my husband of 38 years. I planned the funeral. I called our children. I chose the hymns and the flowers and the reading from Corinthians because he had always liked that one, even though he never set foot in a church unless someone was being married or buried. I stood at the reception afterwards in our living room on Bass Lane Road, and I shook hands with people I hadn't seen in 15 years. And I said, thank you. Yes, he was a wonderful man. Thank you for coming. I did all of it. Every last terrible thing. And then 14 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I saw him standing in the cereal aisle at the Loblaws near Merivale. I had just come from my physiotherapy appointment. My knee had been bothering me since the fall, and I had started going twice a week. I remember I had a list in my hand: oatmeal, the kind without the sugar packets, some Greek yogurt, a bag of frozen peas. I turned the corner and I stopped walking. He was standing about 4 meters away. He was wearing a gray wool jacket I had never seen before. His hair was a little longer. He had gained some weight around his middle, or maybe lost it. I couldn't tell. I could only stare. He was reading the back of a granola bar box with his reading glasses pushed down to the end of his nose, exactly the way he had always done, exactly the way I had begged him for years to stop doing because I was afraid he'd drop them. I said his name. He didn't look up. I said it louder. The woman in the next aisle glanced over at me. He still didn't look up. And then he did. And he looked right at me, and I watched something cross his face. Recognition, then panic, then something I can only describe as a decision. And he turned and walked quickly toward the back of the store. I stood there for a moment. My list fell out of my hand. Someone said, "Excuse me," and stepped around me to reach the shelf. I thought, I am going to faint. I thought, I am 63 years old and I am losing my mind. I thought, that is my husband. And then I followed him. I left my cart right there in the aisle and I walked fast toward the back of the store. I saw him cut through the deli section. I followed. He went through the door marked Employees Only. I stood in front of that door for a full 10 seconds with my hand pressed flat against it, and then I turned around and walked to the front of the store and sat down on the bench near the customer service desk. A young woman behind the counter asked if I was all right. I said, yes, I'm fine. I just need a minute. I sat there and I thought very carefully. I had identified his body. His name was on the death certificate filed with Service Ontario. His obituary had run in the Ottawa Citizen. I had received the Canada Pension Plan Survivor's Benefit. I had transferred the car into my name. I had done all the things you do when a person dies, because a person had died, because I had seen him with my own eyes. But I had also just seen him with my own eyes. I waited outside the store for 20 minutes. It was cold, mid-March cold, the kind that bites even when the sun is out. I stood near the cart return, and I waited. He never came out the front door. I drove home, and I sat in the driveway for a long time. There is a particular quality to shock when it is very large. It doesn't feel like anything at first. It is completely quiet inside. I sat in my car and watched a neighbor walk his dog past the end of my driveway, and I thought about nothing at all. And then something shifted, very slowly, like a door swinging open in a dark room, and the thought arrived fully formed. If my husband was alive, then who had I buried? I called my daughter that evening. She lives in Kingston, about 2 hours away. She had taken the death very hard, probably harder than any of us. She had adored her father. They had the same sense of humor, the same stubborn streak. They could argue for an hour about nothing, and both enjoy every minute of it. When she answered, I asked how she was, and she told me about her day, and I listened. And then I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause that is longer than it should be. I said, I think I saw your father today. Another pause, longer. I said, her name? She said, Mom. That was all she said, just Mom. And in that one word I heard everything. I heard that she knew. I heard that she had known for a while. I heard that she had decided not to tell me. I heard 38 years of my marriage falling away like the side of a cliff. I hung up. I don't usually hang up on people. It is not something I do. But I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, and I walked to the window, and I looked out at the street, and I thought, my daughter has known that her father is alive, and she let me grieve. She called back 11 times that night. I didn't answer. I couldn't sleep. I made tea. I didn't drink. I sat in the chair in the living room that used to be his chair before it became just a chair, and I went through everything, every memory, every inconsistency I had ignored because grief makes you want to ignore inconsistencies. The way his brother had been so very composed at the funeral, unusually so for a man who cried at hockey games. The way the coffin had been closed. They had told me the trauma of the event made an open viewing inadvisable, and I had accepted that because I was in shock, and you accept what people tell you when you are in shock. The way the lawyer handling the estate had seemed almost nervous when he went through the paperwork with me. I pulled out the folder I kept in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. I am organized. I have always been organized. I found the death certificate and I read it carefully. I found the letter from the funeral home. I found the paperwork from the CPP. Then I called a lawyer, not the estate lawyer, a different one, a woman I had met years ago at a neighborhood association meeting who had since gone into family law. I called her at 7:30 in the morning, and I apologized for the hour, and she told me not to worry about it, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need you to not speak to your daughter or anyone else connected to this until we meet. We met that afternoon. What she explained to me, carefully and in plain language, was this. What had potentially been done constituted fraud on a significant scale. The fraudulent death certificate, if that is what it was, the CPP survivor payments I had received and spent in good faith, which I would not be liable for, but which would need to be reported, the estate proceedings, whoever had helped him, and someone had helped him, because you cannot produce a death certificate and a body alone, had committed serious criminal offenses. And my husband, if he was alive, had committed them too. She asked if I had any idea who might have helped him. I thought about the brother who hadn't cried. 2 days later, my daughter came to the house. I had decided to let her come. She stood in my kitchen, and she looked smaller than I had ever seen her look, and she said, Mom, I'm so sorry, and she started to cry. I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not cry. I asked her to sit down as well, and I asked her to tell me everything. What she told me took about an hour. Her father had come to her 8 months ago. 8 months. 7 months into my widowhood, when I was still having trouble sleeping through the night, when I was still setting 2 coffee cups out by habit in the morning. He had shown up at her apartment in Kingston. She had understandably been unable to speak. He had told her he needed help. He had told her he had made terrible mistakes, and that he had been in over his head with debts that I didn't know about. He had taken money from his business partner, substantial amounts, over several years, When the business partner found out, he had threatened him. He had panicked. He had made a decision that he described to our daughter as the only way out. He had faked his death. He had found someone willing to provide the paperwork. He had a body, a man who had died in a rooming house in Veneer with no next of kin, approximately his age and build, a man named in no obituary and claimed by no one. He had paid people I will never fully know the names of. He had moved to a small city in Ontario, a few hours away, and begun a different life. He had told our daughter because he wanted money, not because he was sorry, not because he had missed her, because he needed money and she was the only one he thought he could approach without destroying everything. She gave it to him. She gave him money 3 times over 8 months. She told me this while looking at the kitchen table, not at me. I asked her, "And what about me?" She said, "He told me you'd be okay. He said you were strong. He said you'd be better off." I want to be careful here about how I say what I felt in that moment, because the feeling was so large and so specific that ordinary words don't quite fit it. It was not sadness. It was not anger exactly, though anger was in it. It was something closer to a particular kind of clarity, the kind that comes when something you had suspected and dismissed without letting yourself know you were suspecting it is finally confirmed. The kind that makes you feel, alongside all the pain, a strange and solid calm. I looked at my daughter. I said, "You should have told me." She nodded. I said, "I need you to leave now, and I need you to not contact your father, and I need you to understand that I will be speaking to the police." She started to say something. I said her name once quietly. She stopped. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for another hour. Then I called the lawyer again. Then I called the Ottawa Police Service non-emergency line and explained what I believed had taken place. The officer I spoke to took notes and told me someone would be in touch. Someone was in touch the following morning. What happened over the next 4 months is, in part, still ongoing, and I have been advised not to discuss the details. What I can say is this: my husband was located. The circumstances of his arrangement were investigated. The man whose identity had been used in the coffin, the man from the rooming house in Veneer, who had deserved better than what he got, was finally properly identified and recorded. My daughter cooperated fully with the investigators, and I have chosen to believe, that her cooperation came from genuine remorse and not only from self-preservation. The CPP benefits were sorted out. The estate was reopened. The fraudulent death certificate was dealt with by people who know how to deal with such things. I was told more than once that I had done the right thing by coming forward immediately and keeping clear records. I am good at keeping clear records. My husband's lawyer, the one who had seemed nervous, had not known the full truth. He had been partially deceived as well, though there were things he should have questioned and didn't. That is between him and whatever governing body reviews such things. As for my daughter, that is the part I am still working on. She is still my daughter. I love her in the deep, fundamental way that doesn't require the person to have behaved well. But trust is not the same thing as love, and it takes longer to rebuild, and I am not rushing it. She calls on Sundays now, and sometimes I answer, and sometimes I don't. And that is where we are. I have not spoken to my husband. I have nothing to say to him that would require my voice. I sold the house on Bassline Road. It had been his house in every way that mattered. His choice of neighborhood, his preferred renovation projects, his fruit trees in the backyard that he could never stop talking about. I moved to a smaller place in the Glebe, closer to the canal. I can walk to things now. I walk most mornings along the water when the weather allows, through the side streets when it doesn't. I went back to playing piano. I had stopped in my 30s because there was never time, the children, the work, the full and busy life we had built together that I now understand I had built somewhat more sincerely than he had. I play in the evenings. I am not good. I was never particularly good, but I have a small upright in the front room and the neighbors haven't complained. I see my physiotherapist every 2 weeks now, instead of twice a week. My knee has improved. I am told it will probably always give me some trouble, but that I've been doing the exercises consistently, which is the main thing. A woman from my old neighborhood association has become a close friend. We walk together on Thursday mornings, and we have lunch sometimes at the Vietnamese place on Bank Street that she introduced me to, and that I now consider essential to my continued well-being. She knows the full story. She has never once said anything that made me feel I should be ashamed of having loved someone who was not worth it. I think about the man from the rooming house in Bannier. I don't know his full name even now. I have thought about him more than I expected to. He was someone's son, surely. He had a life, however difficult, that ended, and was then borrowed without permission for a deception he had no part in. I don't know how to make that right. I only know that I think about him. I am 63 years old, and I live alone, and my knee hurts when it rains, and I play piano badly in the evenings. And on good days I walk by the canal and feel something I can only call, with some hesitation, but also some confidence, like contentment. Not because everything is fine. Everything is not entirely fine, and I suspect it won't be for a long time, and some of it, the particular shape of the betrayal, the 14 months of grief I spent on a man who was sitting in a different city watching television, I will probably carry with me always. But I am still here. I got up the morning after I hung up on my daughter, and I made coffee, and I called a lawyer, and I kept going. That's the thing about being this age. You have already survived things. You know somewhere in your body before you know it in your mind that you will survive this too. And then you do. I keep thinking about cause and effect, not in any grand or dramatic way, just the quiet, ordinary version of it, the way every choice a person makes tends to find its way back to them eventually, one form or another. My husband made a long series of choices. He took money that wasn't his. He let that spiral until he couldn't see a way out that required him to be honest. And then, instead of sitting across from me at our kitchen table and telling me the truth, a conversation that would have been hard, that I won't pretend would have been easy, he chose to disappear. He chose to let me stand in a cold room at the Ottawa General and nod and say, yes, that's him. He chose to let me grieve, genuinely and completely, for a man who was watching television in a different city. That 'tis not a small thing. That is not a mistake or a lapse in judgment. That is a sustained decision, made over months and then years, to treat another person as though their pain didn't count. And I think about what that requires of a person, the amount of internal justification, the daily work of not feeling it. He told our daughter I'd be okay. He said I was strong. That's how people talk when they've already decided to do the thing, when they need the story to be tidy enough to live with. My daughter made her own choices. I understand them better now than I did that first night, when I set the phone down on the counter and couldn't answer when she called back. She was frightened. She thought she was protecting me by protecting him, or protecting herself, or some complicated mixture of both that she probably couldn't have named clearly at the time. Understanding that doesn't mean it didn't cost me something. It did, but I think there's a kind of intelligence that only comes from actually sitting with what happened, not rushing to forgive, not rushing to condemn, just looking at it clearly and asking yourself what was really going on. I've been trying to do that. It's slower than I expected. What I know is this: the things I did right, I did because I had spent a long time building the habit of doing them, keeping records, calling the right people, not letting shock become paralysis. Those aren't dramatic qualities. They don't make for a good story on their own, but they are what got me through. The plain, unglamorous work of being a person who pays attention and follows through, even when following through is the last thing you feel like doing. The something I want to say about what it means to rebuild at 63. People sometimes speak about resilience as though it's something you either have or you don't, like a gene or a talent. I don't think that's right. I think it's closer to a muscle, and like any muscle, it gets stronger the more you use it, and it also gets tired, and it needs rest, and some days it doesn't work the way you need it to. I had hard days this past year, days when I sat in the new apartment and felt the full weight of 38 years and what they actually were versus what I had believed them to be. I allowed myself those days. And then I got up and went to physiotherapy and played piano badly and walked by the canal. The man from the rooming house in Venier deserved better than what he got. I still think about him. I think honoring that, the fact of his life, the fact that he mattered, is part of what makes this story something other than just mine. I am still here. That is not a small thing either.